Hi there, I'm nicodehaan, and welcome to Living a Primal Lifestyle, where we explore a return to a more balanced and natural wild world.
To recover our natural health and regain our rights and freedoms. And I'm Ellen Dehaan.
Yeah, it's a beautiful day in downtown Durango, Colorado. It's 42 degrees and going up to 46. So we got a little heat wave here for the next week or so.
Yeah, the icicle fell off the side of the house.
Yeah, I heard it. Yeah, for sure. Please subscribe to our channel on YouTube and hit the notification bell and hit the like button if you could like to help our channel grow. We also show the show and we post it on Facebook and on LinkedIn for your convenience. And now we have an affiliate with Mother Earth Labs. Affiliation, yes. And hit the like button, hit the link below the for maximizing your nutrition with humic and fulvic and essential multivitamins. Now, these two products give you all the essential vitamins, minerals, and amino acids required for a healthy immune system, with the capabilities of accessing them and the ability to detox the unwanted stuff in your body. Right. They also make have a great selection of other products that may interest you. So,
and those products are taking over the slot for Primal Edge, which we are phasing out.
Yeah.
And we are sticking with Mother Earth Labs.
Yeah, I've had an affiliation with them really for 10 years through the Primal Edge, and they make great products, and we love the humic and fulvic acids. And all the topics in the show today are in the show notes below the description, and we also posted on the other two sites, Facebook and LinkedIn. So we'll get started with that. First thing I wanted to discuss was I got an email from Matt in St. Pete, and he got in touch with us about a week ago because of the Primal Edge being dropped by TFNN. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to correspond with him. He says, getting in touch with you last week reminded me of an old show topic you had on the Grand Solar Minimum. Maybe you guys could do an update on that sometime. Fantastic topic, especially here on the water in Florida. Yeah, that's right. He's in Florida. He kind of switched from what we had. He was in Colorado, and he switched to St. Pete. Nice guy.
Yeah. So he was asking about the Grand Solar Minimum and getting an update on that and how that's working.
Yeah, I put a couple articles in the show notes. In fact, 3 of them. One is the first one. The sun just woke up. Space weather feared after a weakest cycle. Boy, having a tough time today. In 100 years, said NASA. Now this is from this is from over a year ago. This article, but it gives you a pretty good description of what the sun does. Of course, the sun goes through a maximum and minimum in approximately anywhere from 9 to 14 years, the average being about 11 years. Mm-hmm. And about 2 years ago, we hit the low point. And the low point is really when the sun doesn't show much activity.
So there's
the sunspots. Yeah. And if you don't know what sunspots are, they're kind of like the hurricanes on Earth. We could call them actually Earth spots, but we call them hurricanes or cyclones, depending on geographically where you are. But it's an interesting phenomenon that the sun does.
Well, the sunspots are basically they're kind of they're places where the creation of the electrons and the neutrons, the protons from the sun, are making solar flares. And CMEs, which are coronal mass ejections. Now,
right.
The CMEs are the things that we kind of really watch out for.
Because it kind of throws it off the sun.
It's energy.
It's a big energy.
And it heads right, it can head right for Earth.
Yeah, some of them miss us and some of them hit other planets, but they make a big difference. And a lot of scientists are correlating the fact that hurricanes get stronger during the cycles. And also, we've done a lot of research on the earthquakes being related to that, because it's all this electrical type of system that we have with plasma and everything like that.
Yeah, the sun is not a ball of fire. It's a ball of energy. Yeah. It's electrical energy, basically plasma energy.
And the energy actually goes from the North poles and the south poles towards the center, that's what happens on Earth too. So it seems like it's a congruent system throughout the universe, the way these things act. Yeah, it's a very interesting thing.
But it says that the sun's corona releases the energy in flares that contain hot ionized gas, which then can travel to the Earth. And when it does, then what we see is we have problems with computers, with communication networks, satellites, power distribution networks, aviation, and potential exposure to radiation for the astronauts.
Yeah, and of course, during the weak part of it, which we just kind of finished, now we're heading up to the stronger part where we're getting much more activity in the sun. So the weaker part is where you don't get the sunspots. And what happens is the sun kind of charges the Earth's atmosphere. So
the magnetosphere.
Magnetosphere, exactly. And magnetosphere is what protects us from all this radiation. That comes from the sun, it comes from other stars, it comes from the center of the galaxy. Yeah, so during the maximum, we get a lot more activity, and because during solar minimums, we don't have that recharge of the magnetosphere, then when the maximum comes, we're more susceptible to getting these sunspots and getting the negative effects. The negative effects.
Yeah, and in addition to just messing around with all your devices, it also affects your health.
Yes.
And so there's kind of, if you have heart conditions, if you have pacemakers, if you have, if there are issues of that can be affected by electrical currents, then you want to be aware of the fact that if there's a CME coming, you want to be mindful not to go outside and be exposed to it as little as possible.
Yeah, you have to shield yourself. Get a metal roof for your house.
Yeah, a metal roof for
that
your
always
house.
Helps. The other thing too is the grand solar minimum is these periods that happened, and the last time it happened was in the mid 1800s, where we had that electrical event that knocked out and caused fire in the telegraph lines. That was, of course, the first time we started really using electricity that we know of. And since then, we've had several different things. I know in the 80s, Quebec and New York City was out for a period of time with electricity because of the disruption of the sun. And of course, this can happen at any time.
Yeah, there's something called a Maunder minimum.
And that's what was one of the real solar minimums, and there is a grand solar minimum.
Yeah,
and we're kind of expecting that maybe in the next cycle or the next cycle after that. A lot of people thought it was going to be this cycle. We really don't know. We just have to keep a watch on it.
Well, the term Maunder minimum is it's a capitalized term. It actually refers to a specific period between 1645 and 1715 when the sun was at a very, very low ebb, and sunspots were exceedingly rare, and there's speculation it could have been a little ice age as a result.
Yeah.
And then after 4 solar cycles with a declining number of sunspots, something similar was feared recently, but now they're saying that solar cycle 25 will end that trend.
We'll see what happens.
Start building.
I've put a couple of videos in the show notes. The first one after this particular link is one that Ben from a Suspicious Observer put out this morning. Ben Davidson, yeah. He's become a friend over the years, and we watch his site.
He's a space weatherman.
Yes, he is. And he's got the first video is just what happened this morning. Apparently, NASA had put up a satellite with these 40 different communication satellites, and a bunch of them went out because of the solar flare that happened, I guess, in the last 24 hours. And the other link was the disaster cycle. Now, the Mayans and many other cultures have told us about this 12,000-year cycle, and Ben has been investigating this for the last 10 years. And this gives you a good synopsis of what he's talking about. And if you want to dive a little deeper in what the sun does, I highly recommend that article. It's called the Earth Disaster Documentary.
It's a video.
Yeah, it's a video. It's really a compilation of maybe 30 or 40 videos that he did over the last year or so. And he kind of condensed it into one thing and put it out around Christmas time.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Very interesting thing. And highly recommend that.
And particularly Ben was involved in the group that was early on thinking there was a link between earthquakes and solar activity.
Yeah, now what he does every morning, he puts out a video report on YouTube, suspicious observers, and he talks about what the activity on the sun does. And it gives you a lot of scientific data kind of correlating with what he's talking about. So it's very interesting stuff. And
It's
you
very
can kind of
brief.
make
It's a very brief video. And
well, it's an hour or so, I think.
in the morning?
No,
No,
the
I'm
the
talking
morning
about
one
the
is,
morning one.
yeah, it's usually a 6
The
minute
suspicious
thing.
observers.
Yeah. So the next link I have after that is called the Freedom Convoy Preemptive SOS Press Conference, and this happened February 7th of this year. And I just wanted to put that in here because there's a lot on the mainstream news talking about that the people who are occupying mainly Ottawa, Ontario,
They're
Canada.
not occupying it.
They're actually just a
gathering
demonstration, but they're
and-
calling
yeah.
it occupation. They're also calling it
the media
terrorism.
is, yeah.
And of course, you have maybe one guy in there with a Nazi flag, and now they determine that everybody is doing this.
Well,
I just want to put that video in there just to see how calm and how intelligent these people are. It's a group of people who are representing the truckers, but there's also a bunch of scientists and doctors that are feeling that the mandates are something that should be a choice. The vaccine should be a choice. Something I believe there should be a choice. Give us the information, and we'll probably make the right decision. This is what human beings
you'll make
have
the right
always done.
decision for yourself.
Well, of course, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So I just
Anyway,
wanted to.
it's just another point of view and an interesting and
Yeah, so
calm.
COVID is so much in the news today, and there's a lot of scare tactics, and there's a lot of things maybe you should be concerned about, especially if you have one of these comorbidities that make you more susceptible. You know, COVIDs are basically a cold, and they can develop into something very seriously. We all know this. I mean, just getting a cold, and if you have some kind of compromise, maybe you get pneumonia, and maybe it even goes deeper and people die. It's always the way it's been. We always believe that the first line of defense is going to be your immune system. So the better you are at
boosting it and supporting it.
yeah, I think the better off
Building
you are
it.
against any kind of disease that comes up. You know, you have to really make up your own mind. You know, we had a video last week about this guy in Spain that was seeing this graphene oxide in there. And I have been reading up on that. And a couple of the scientists are saying, well, actually what he's doing, the slide material that they use has graphene in it. So maybe
It's
he's seeing that.
contaminating the samples.
Yeah, so there's, I mean, you really have to, I mean, it seems
Well,
like scare tactics.
Ultimately, there's a lot of information floating around out there. And there's a lot of counter information to the information that's floating around out there.
That's for sure.
So it's really a good idea to just kind of keep your mind open
I think so.
and do what you need to do to protect yourself and what feels right for you. But pay attention to the scientific papers that are coming out and the doctors who are reporting on alternate and supportive and early treatment, and just know that there are options out there.
Yeah. So the next article we have is called Israeli Study Shows Natural Immunity Delivers 13 Times More Protection Than the COVID Vaccines. So this is quite a large study. And it points out that there have been quite a few studies, but this is probably one of the largest studies they've ever done.
Yeah. How many?
And some of the smaller studies show kind of the opposite. And these are the ones that the companies that make the vaccines are showing, the smaller studies.
Well,
so this is a larger study. And again, you have to kind of make up your own mind. Do I believe this one? Do I believe the other one?
Well, just like with statistics, you can find studies that will support any position that you want to take.
Yes.
And so don't just blindly absorb and read every single thing that comes out of wherever. Look at all sides of it, and this, as I say, was quite a large study. I'm trying to find the sentence that told us how many people were involved in this study.
Well, it starts off saying last week the DOH launched
Department of Health.
Department of Health.
That's
launched
in Washington State, I believe.
they launched a new vaccination verification tool. The system provides a digital copy of state vaccines records according to the website. You may also show your CDC provided COVID-19 card or your state immunization record. And this means that you have a proof of your vaccination status. And it gets getting more and more things that if you want to go into someplace, you're going to have to show some kind of record.
Let's not go there.
Well, we're going to an event in a couple of weeks around the 1st of March. So we're going to get a test to make sure, and the facility requires a test. They don't require the vaccine necessarily.
Well, because requiring the vaccine would be basically illegal and unconstitutional.
Well, there's still places like you have to get on an airline. You have to show proof of your vaccination. So maybe illegal, but it's legal for the airlines.
It remains to be seen what will happen now that the Supreme Court overruled the requirement that anything over 100 employees you
So things are changing, but remember if you want to go overseas, you're going to have a vaccine
or be quarantined and
But one thing
aside from that, let's talk about these.
Well, they don't mention any natural immunity.
Right, and that's the key here. Yeah. I mean, the article doesn't. The studies done by the CDC don't discuss.
Well, the vaccine verification tool doesn't take into account.
Right.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So does your body's natural immune system or the natural immunity one acquires after having COVID-19 offer better protection than the 3 FDA-approved vaccines? Should someone with natural immunity be required to get a vaccine anyway? These are the questions that we're always asking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the Israeli study demonstrated that natural immunity confers longer lasting and stronger protection against infection, symptomatic disease, and hospitalization for the Delta variant, and compared to the 2-dose vaccine-induced immunity.
Yeah.
So it was interesting. There's a very interesting...
There's a nice graph here.
Yeah. And it talks about... There were they've broken it down by decade, basically 20 to 29, 30 to 39, etc., and to 90 plus.
Right.
And that came to approximately 15,634 people were fully vaccinated, 3,038 unvaccinated, and then the percentage of cases of COVID, breakthrough cases, people who were vaccinated, there were 86% breakthrough cases for people who were vaccinated.
Right.
And there were 84% for those who were quote unquote, what percentage of the population is fully vaccinated? And they've got an average of 84.4%. So it's like more than the average number of people fully vaccinated got somehow.
So, but overall, these studies, it should be noted that the Israeli study had a pool of people 10 times larger than the number of in the CDC studies. So those were the studies made by Pfizer. It's kind of so you have all these studies. One, which is the largest study, shows that you're much better off with natural immunity. But then you have these other smaller studies by the vaccine companies that show that you're better off with the vaccine. Again, you have to kind of make up your own mind. It's always been the case with most of these viruses that natural immunity has won out. It seems to be maybe changing according to this information. Now, people who had COVID in the past seem to get maybe a breakthrough case, even if you're not vaccinated, even if you are vaccinated. It's both case. Yeah. So my question is always, is it worthwhile to get the vaccine? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Oh. And what they're saying now, and it seems like they're changing. It's kind of like with the mask. When Fauci came out very early in 2020, he said, don't wear a mask. Then in 6 months later, it doesn't do any good. Mm-hmm. Then he said, well, the reason I said that is because we were short on masks. I wanted to make sure that the masks were getting to the right places. So now putting a mask on gives you some protection. Doesn't give you. Then he says, no, that's a real good thing. So everything has been changing.
Well, let me just
Okay.
back to this article for just a minute. There is a professor at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, and he's the editor-in-chief of MedPage Today. He argues that mandating vaccines for every living, walking American is not well supported by science today, with what we know now
right.
compared to 2 years ago. He says some people have natural immunity, and that is they had the COVID infection and developed immunity.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says, but here we are, a year and a half into the clinical experience of observing patients who were infected, and natural immunity is effective and going strong. And that's because with natural immunity, the body develops antibodies to the entire surface of the virus, not just the spike protein that was constructed from a vaccine.
And I think the important part of that too is because when you get the vaccine, you're still shedding for a period of time, anywhere from 3 days up to maybe 10 days. You're still shedding. You could give it to somebody else, whereas natural immunity, that doesn't happen. And that's the reason that you were just stating, for that particular reason.
Yeah, they said that there's 6.7 times greater level of protection among those with natural immunity than those with vaccinated immunity. And then we have an article further down that talks about, what happens, what's the mechanism. But the bottom line is that he said there are more than 15 studies that have demonstrated the power of immunity acquired by previously having the virus.
Right.
And he referenced that Israel found that those who had experienced prior infections were 27 times less likely to get a second symptomatic COVID infection than those who were vaccinated. And that affirmed a Cleveland Clinic study of healthcare workers who had been exposed to the virus. None of them who had tested positive for the virus got reinfected.
Right.
So the study authors concluded individuals who have the infection are unlikely to benefit from the vaccination. So, that's the point.
Yeah.
Once you've had it, then
you're
in good shape in terms of immunity.
The only message we hear from the companies and from the government is saying, no, you still need to get vaccinated. And a lot of people are hesitant to get vaccinated, maybe because of some problems they had with vaccines in the past, or maybe they just don't believe in the science. Whatever the case is, I still think we live in a free society where that is up to the individual and not up to a company or the government or peer pressure, which we see a lot of today.
Well, in May, a Washington University study found that even a mild infection resulted in long-lasting immunity.
Yeah.
So,
the article you were talking about is the next one. That's 6 big differences between natural versus vaccine-induced immunity. So apparently both of them give you a partial immunity or perhaps complete immunity, at least to that variant. Whether it jumps, if you've had one variant, whether you get another one. It seems to indicate that even if you've had the first bout of the COVID-19 in the very beginning, then you've got immunity, and your immunity is pretty strong to all these variants. But you may still get some mild condition. But it's kind of like the measles. If you are near people who have it, then you kind of share the antibodies. So
well, here's the deal. As of now, with again the benefit of a few years behind us, it's turned out that no matter what was said initially, or what was thought initially, or what was hoped initially, it has been shown that the actual vaccines are failing to deliver broad immunity. So they deliver narrow and short-lived, non-durable immunity that's inferior to the more robust, durable, and broader-based immunity that's acquired actually following an infection.
Yeah, there is now overwhelming evidence of the failure of the jabs to provide transmission. To prevent transmission, the primary purpose for the conventional vaccines, and most notably the Omicron variant, which is the high infection rates. They're consistently found in countries with the greatest jab coverage. So, rapidly waning effectiveness in reducing the risk of hospitalization and death, and an emerging picture of significantly underreported and widespread vaccine injuries and disruption of the immune system. And they have some links in there too.
We've talked about that a little bit in the past couple of weeks, that it's turning out that you can actually overstimulate and overwhelm your immune system with too much support.
Yeah, these the boosters kind of thing.
Yeah,
and, you know, and
But
now the picture is if somebody's asking you if you're fully vaccinated, what does that mean? Does that mean the 2 jabs? Does it mean 2 jabs plus a booster? Or does it mean 2 boosters? And are they going to be suggesting that the boosters are going to be quarterly or maybe every, twice a year or once a year, just like the flu vaccine? That seems to indicate where we're headed.
Yeah, it says there's no scientific basis to indiscriminately expose vast numbers of people to the experimental shots, regardless of their infection status, health status, susceptibility, or prior immunity from previous infection. So the problem is that it's very, very interesting. This article has a lot of interesting stuff in it. Talks about 6 big differences between natural versus the vaccination conferred immunity. And the first thing it says is intramuscular jabs don't induce sterilizing immunity in the upper airway.
Yeah, because they're injecting it in the muscle, and it kind of goes into the muscle, which goes into the cell itself, but doesn't give you any relief in your upper respiratory area at all. So not your throat, not your nose, not your lungs, and from there. So the second one
but just a little bit more on that. It says that basically there's a delay of a few days before the body starts to produce a modified form of the spike protein after you've gotten the shot. And then it triggers an elevation of the anti-spike antibodies. And then when that happens within the body, but it does not affect the anti-spike IgA that's produced in epithelial cells of the airway adjacent to the respiratory mucosa, which is, in other words, your nose and your throat, where the virus enters your body.
And that's what you give off to other people too.
Well, and then you can share it nicely. And it says that this abnormal relationship between the antibodies, the anti-spike antibodies, and the natural immune system responses, it doesn't occur following naturally acquired infection. So
this is one of the reasons why jab people are still infecting other people for a number of days.
They can transmit. Right.
So the number 2 is that the jabs induce immunity that wanes very quickly, while natural acquired immunity is more robust and durable.
And they say this has been shown in a number of studies. 146 research studies provided overwhelming evidence of the superior robustness and durability of naturally acquired immunity.
So number 3 is the jabs induce immunity to the spike protein of the original Wuhan strain of SARS-CoV-2, not the currently circulating forms of the Omicron or the Delta. Yeah. So they're always saying that, it has some effect on the Omicron, but there's a lot more, and Delta, but there's a lot more breakthrough cases because it's the original formula.
Well, and it does say here that the Omicron has successfully developed to evade the immune response.
Yeah. Number 4 is the payload of these jabs are not limited to the deltoid muscle as they were led to believe in the early days of the rollout. So these spike proteins that get the vaccine kind of spreads it throughout your body. It's not just going to remain in your muscles where it's intended to be.
And that's the problem right there, because they have shown now that the mRNA jabs got into the circulation of bodies, entered the spleen, the ovaries, the heart, the brain, and we know that there have been an outbreak of myocarditis for young people. It's an inflammation of the lining of the heart, and there's been problems with reproduction and with for young women. And
well, it really shows up in a lot of the athletes, especially soccer players who are always running around the field. It's not reported highly, but there's sources you can find that there's hundreds of them that have just kind of collapsed. So that's
Number 5.
Yep.
Intramuscular jabs rely heavily on inducing immunity through B cell IgG antibodies and not the innate immunity or the T cells.
Yeah, and which we all have talked about before, that the T cells are really is where you want the immunity to go.
Mm-hmm. And it says, they're looking at the role of the innate immune system, the system that responds immediately to any invasion. If we were to allow nature to take its course, the bloodstream would very seldom be the first part of the body exposed to respiratory pathogens. Right. So normally the sticky mucosal layer of our airways has learned over millennia to use a series of physical and chemical barriers to impede the pathogen from entering your body in the first place.
Right. It says here too, part of the reason for a more robust immune system from naturally acquired infection versus the jab stems from the immune system needs to respond to all 29 proteins when exposed to the actual virus versus just the spike protein.
Yeah.
So all these different proteins play a part, not just the ones that they
it's not as simple, Brian. The body is hugely complex.
Yeah. And I think they're finding out more and more what happens here.
And then the last thing, number 6, was they were talking again about the damage to autoimmune, the increase in autoimmune diseases and the damage to autoimmunity.
Yeah, and the question is, might the jabs awaken the sleeping dragon of autoimmunity? And we talked a little about this last week when some of these studies in Europe showed that if you're getting too much of a boost, that your immune system actually wanes.
Overwhelmed.
Yeah, it gets overwhelmed.
Yeah, so it says, given the importance of environmental triggers in mediating autoimmune disease, it is highly probable that autoimmune risk will escalate in relation to the frequency of exposure. So anybody with a predisposition or an existing autoimmune disease should be looking at very carefully at the
so if you're compromised in certain ways, it might be worse for you to get all these boosters.
And they're talking about intranasal vaccines. And they're saying that those would share the same entry pathway as the respiratory viruses, much more likely to induce the same sequence of innate and adaptive immune responses as natural infection.
Yeah, and those have always shown to be better for the flus and things like that. And it makes a lot of sense if you're injecting something into your lungs by the way of either the throat or the nasal passages, then it's getting where the problem starts.
And yet, 84% of the vaccines are intramuscular. So it's interesting.
Yeah. So the next item is how accurate are the rapid COVID tests? And they go through not just the COVID tests that are rapid, but the other ones. And we find that they're somewhat accurate, but not real accurate.
Well, there's 2 different kinds.
Yeah.
You've got your polymerase chain reaction, the PCR test, which is the diagnostic test, or the molecular test. That's the one that takes about 72 hours to get
those are probably
response.
more.
It goes to the lab.
Yeah.
And they say that they're considered the gold standard for diagnosis by the CDC. The second type is the antigen test, and they're looking for certain molecules found on the surface of the virus. These are the rapid tests, and they can provide results in as little as 15 minutes. They do not require lab analysis. And so, any of the tests can be false positive or false negative. So, but
the home tests are the worst, it seems. Yeah.
That's all we have.
Yeah. And they're distributing a lot of the home tests.
Home tests, yeah. They do say that.
So when we go in a couple of weeks, we're going to this event, we're going to get a test. It's going to be one of those tests that we can get 24 hours. Yeah. They want the results within 3 days of you entering the facility. Mm-hmm. So we're going to get more of a rapid type of test. Mm-hmm. So, I read or listened to a podcast. I think there was maybe the news that this flight that left New York, I think it was going to Israel, but I'm not really positive anymore, that 87 people were on the flight, or 87 people were tested to enter and go on this flight, and they were all tested negative. Mm-hmm. By the time they landed, they had another test, and a certain majority of
80-something% of them
had
positive.
Yeah. So apparently somebody had it and spread it rather quickly. So you really don't know. But the thing is, you need them to get into certain places.
Right. And, I don't object to having a test. That's no problem.
No, I don't either.
It's just, so that works for me.
Yep.
That works for me.
So the next one is what happens when doctors buck the government narrative on COVID? And this is not just happening in the United States. It's happening even more so like in Australia, but Austria also. Austria, the government there is requiring everyone to be vaccinated. Otherwise, you can't leave your house except under certain emergencies and things like that.
You can go for food. What was it? What was the one you were telling me? You can leave for food, for medical care, emergency medical care, or a checkup.
Yeah, that was in Australia, and that was one of the one of the senators for the national government there, who was. He said they got a casual exposure, so not somebody that was next to him, but they discovered that he was somewhere where somebody else tested positive. So they made him quarantine for 14 days. Couldn't go out except for those 3 reasons. They put a monitor system on, so he couldn't go within.
If he left.
Yeah, if you left. And of course, then you can't exercise, you can't do certain things. And he was quite upset about it, but that's what happens. So this is related to a video that I was watching with the host, Brian Hooker, who was a PhD, a PE, and he was being interviewed by Dr. Alvin Moss. And this was basically happening in Virginia.
That was a very interesting video.
Yeah, and I wanted to put this in here, and there's a link to the video in that show note, and they talk about the freedoms and.
Well, he was talking primarily about the fact that he felt completely hamstrung and unable to treat his patients.
Well, that's because he was let go from the hospital privileges, so he couldn't do his hospital rounds anymore, and he was stripped of his. Doctorate kind of, so he couldn't practice. And he said that, there's always been...
No, he's stripped of his license.
There's a license, whatever, yeah. Excuse me. He talked specifically about medical exemptions, that in Virginia, the medical exemptions were the lowest they'd ever been, 0.01%, when the national average is 2.7. And these are medical exemptions for people who are maybe too young, kindergartners.
That was what he was talking about.
Yeah.
He was saying, for not giving them a shot.
Yeah.
He says, don't, if you're interested in health freedom, don't move to West Virginia unless you plan to homeschool.
Yeah. So the discussion really took a personal turn because he was...
his son was very badly injured by taking, as a result of side effects of the vaccine.
Yeah, and so he was giving him preemptive type of drugs like maybe ivermectin, I don't remember, but whatever he was doing, the hospital said, "Oh, you shouldn't be doing that. We want to treat him here in the hospital. When he gets really bad, just bring him here." And he said, "Well, there's a lot of stuff I can do at home for my brother." The hospital says, "Well, your privileges are gone," and that's how the whole conversation came about.
If you give out, quote, misinformation, close quote, and I guess misinformation is code for anything we don't approve of.
Right. And most of the things that they don't approve of are now the generic drugs that are relatively inexpensive and pretty much by competent doctors like McCullough, who's probably the most written about as far as...
Published a lot of articles.
Published a lot of articles, been in front of Congress many times, and he recommends a certain regime of hydrochloroquine, all these different things. Yeah, zinc, vitamin D, and the hospital says, no, you can't do that. And the next one is really about nurses. The healthcare workers say they were fired after raising safety concerns.
Yeah, and that one really had to do with it was a privately held hospital, and the nurses were asking for certain patients to be placed in the ICU where they have a clear window to be able to look in and see the patients. And they were not being put there. They were being put in solid door spaces.
And not only that, people wouldn't be going in; they were kind of just observing them from a distance. And the nurse that was interviewed here was saying, "Well, I don't think that's enough. I think we should go in and check on these people."
Well, she really wanted to be able to see them because you could see
Right.
if they're in distress, and you
Yeah.
could rush in. You know?
So she had a couple of days off, and when she got back, she was informed that she was, our protocols are sufficient, and you.
Well, when the hospital checks its own protocols and decides they're sufficient.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's an interesting article, and that's not the only one in there that talks about this. And they were really fired about being overcautious. And I would think in a hospital setting, if you're overcautious, maybe that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah.
That's just me, folks. So let's move on so you can read that stuff for yourself. Interesting article about how your body controls inflammation during the cleanup mechanisms of damaged cells.
Yeah, this is a very technical article.
It is very technical. The reason I wanted to put it in there because we're promoting a product called humic and fulvic, and this is the stuff that comes from the soil that signals your cells to open up and let the good stuff in and kind of detox the things you don't use. And the things you don't use, of course, are part of that is the damaged cells. Mm-hmm. So there's two specific proteins that are
that regulate this cell death mechanism.
Yeah, we're just trying to they're just kind of figuring this stuff out, and under microscopes they have been able to see these proteins in action.
How they work.
Yeah, how they work and how it's actually inflammation that triggers the whole thing. So when you think about having inflammation, we think right away, let's use aspirin or ibuprofen or various different kinds of medications to reduce the inflammation, when a lot of our ancestors said, oh, well, this is a sign that your body is fighting back, and this is a good thing, so we'll let you go through the process, and if it gets too high, then we'll do something about it. But our ancient ancestors knew this, but now it seems like a lot of the common sense is gone from that theory, saying that if you got inflammation, let's reduce it right away.
Treat the symptoms and not the cause.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, they're really looking at all of this for cancer treatments.
Yeah.
But
it applies to just about everything. I mean, when you get a fever.
Yeah, of course. Everything's inflammation.
Yes, it is. It certainly is. Mm-hmm. So that's an interesting one.
Yeah, just have to spend a little time reading the words.
Yeah. So another one is a top functional medicine doctor explains why NMN shows early promise for promoting longevity. This is something that we take from the advice of Dr. David Sinclair. Quite a few years ago, we listened to a lot of his broadcasts and questionnaires and decided maybe this is something that we would take and see what happens. And within about 30 days, we kind of noticed that we thought it was working.
Yeah, we felt better.
Yeah, and this is kind of what we go on. We kind of go on our instincts to see, if we take something that's recommended by somebody that's been in the field of medicine and taking himself, which is an important part of it. If a doctor's not doing that, then maybe you question it a little bit more, but when him and himself and he's giving it to his father and things like that, and he's a proven researcher for decades on the subject of longevity.
Yeah, well, so NMN stands for nicotinamide mononucleotide, and it's a molecule that occurs naturally in all living things. It's a form of vitamin B3. So that was... and it
may show promise for increasing your lifespan.
Right.
Something I'm always interested in, too.
Well, of course. And when it comes to anti-aging, Dr. Lipman said, we talk about sleep, exercise, and diet, but cellular aging or deterioration of cellular function is one of the hallmarks of aging.
Yeah.
So he says there is evidence that suggests that, well, then he's talking about NMN.
Well, he's talking about first about NAD, and the research is first, is kind of new on it. But what NMN does is there's evidence suggesting that NAD may help the body repair neuronal stress and stress that occurs in the brain's neurons in animal test subjects. This indicates that NMN may protect the brain against memory loss. Scientific research also suggests that NAD may increase endurance and strengthen muscles and lengthen lifespans by improving mitochondrial functions. So NMN is the precursor. Mm-hmm. When you take it, it converts into NAD, mm-hmm. and NAD is the thing that they're talking about here. So why take NMN? The reason is because the body kind of converts it into something that is very useful.
And then we take transresveratrol as well, and between the two of those,
that seems to boost it about 1,000-fold, they say.
Yeah, and it adds the telomeres, which we talked about as being part of the genes that, and as you're born with a lot of telomeres, but the shorter your telomeres become, the less life you have left.
Yes, and the article here says one of the bummers of NMN is that you can't rely on foods to get your daily fill.
Right. They said there's a trace amount in broccoli.
Yeah, but it's not enough. So supplementation is the only way so far that we know we can get it. And we use it, so we recommend you do your own research and make up your mind if it's something you want to take.
Maybe see if you feel better if you take it.
Yeah. And the last article that we have here, if farmers spray these microbes on crops, they don't need fertilizer.
Yeah, this is very interesting.
Yeah, this is kind of new science also, and we know that natural fertilizers is basically excrements from animals and humans, and we've used those for centuries.
Nitrogen. We need nitrogen.
We need nitrogen, and the way it kind of works is that if the animals are roaming around, they're not only just pooping and peeing all over the place, they're adding that nitrogen to the soil, and smaller animals and insects break that down even further, gets into the soil becomes really healthy and things grow, the animals eat that, and there's the nice cycle. Mm-hmm. We eat the animals, or maybe we eat the vegetables or whatever, and that's how the cycle of life always has become, always has sustained itself. So now we enter the 1940s after the World War II, and things change. We start using natural fertilizers as an augmentation to that, because now we're corralling the animals. We're no longer letting them roam around. And so when they're confined, and the more we confine them, the more they're really pooping and standing in it, which is really unhealthy. So now they're no longer doing it in the pasture as much.
Well,
now we have to supplement the soil.
A lot of reasons why the soil has become depleted.
Well,
they're not rotating crops. They're not rotating stock, and
we're not using the natural system that nature
that
has
always worked.
Yeah,
right. And
so then we started using oil products from the chemical products from the oil industry as the nitrogen. So that's another form that probably, if you're thinking about something that is in a liquid form, that is not as natural as going through an animal's body.
Spray on the ground.
Yeah, so it's not gone through the same system, and there's always been questions about whether that's wise or not, or whether that's giving the same nutrients in there.
But it's cheap, and it's widespread, and
you can time it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of advantage to it, certainly. Mm-hmm. So now they're going, it seems like a step further, where they're making it possible for synthetic fertilizer in a much more compact method. More concentrated, that's the word.
Yeah, the article starts by saying the invention of synthetic fertilizer made it possible to feed billions of people, but it also caused those good old unintended consequences.
Yes.
Making fertilizer from fossil fuels is now responsible for more than 20% of agriculture's huge carbon footprint, and fertilizer that washes off the fields, pollutes the water, and causes dead zones in the oceans.
Yeah, that dead zones in the ocean should probably give you the first indicator that
it's not a good thing.
That's exactly
it's not a healthy thing.
So fertilizers now that use microbes instead of the fossil fuels to give plants the nitrogen they need to grow quickly.
So a group that came out of Harvard, the company is called, I just was looking at it, Kula
Bio.
Kula Bio. Yeah, it sounds, well, never mind. So Kula Bio came up with this bacteria that naturally occurs and has the capability of grabbing nitrogen from the air. And then they also created a process so that it would live for more than 2 weeks so they can capture far more nitrogen for the crops. Company starts by growing the microbes in a bioreactor. So as many as possible are in a liter of its fertilizer and feeding them a nutritional mix.
Yeah.
Then they cut off the food source and the microbes are under stress. They sense they don't have any food, so they start to store and hoard energy. They grab carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen and start producing this energy storing material in their cell structures.
And that helps the microbes last in the field.
Yeah, so then they spray it on the crops, same way they would a synthetic fertilizer. And then they say that the regular synthetic fertilizer can run right off the field because they spray a large amount at one time.
Right.
If it rains, it washes it
away.
out.
Right.
Yeah, but these microbes produce nitrogen on demand. So if they sense a deficit of nitrogen in the soil, they immediately kick in with their creation of nitrogen.
Right.
And if they say there's a lot of nitrogen, they don't do it. They
Right.
shut down.
So this
the
seems like a better system.
Yeah. Well, they also capture carbon, and when they die, the carbon stays in the soil, which again makes the soil healthier.
Yeah.
It's
So
very
this
interesting.
tailors the microbes for the particular plants. Also, it's also getting an organic certification, so it can be used on organic farms.
Yeah.
So we don't know yet whether this is actually going to be very, very beneficial. It sounds like a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well, they're also trying. There's some practical challenges involved. Like how much does it cost for the farmer?
Yeah.
How can you apply it using the equipment they already have?
Right.
That's what they're looking at, their bottom line, and they don't want to be spending a lot of money. So they'll say the farmer will do it if it works and if it's cost competitive.
Yeah. Well, that's the basis for all of it, I think.
Yeah, and
So
we have to do something to replenish the soil.
that is the key, and we want it to be as healthy as possible. And it seems like this might be one of the things saying, hey, we made it full circle, and now, so we'll see what happens, I guess.
Interesting
That's pretty much,
stuff.
yeah. So that's it, folks. Invite you to go to Mother Labs. The description will be in the show notes. Take a look at some of the products there, specifically the fulvic and humic acid and the essential nutrients. And I think you'll find that within 30 days, if you start taking something like this, it's going to really help your immune system. And I think you can feel it really rather quickly. We highly recommend it. We use it ourselves. And that's pretty much the show. So thanks for sticking around. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.